In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. There was a point when Zen master Shunryu Suzuki was giving a lecture, and one of the individuals in the audience raised their hand and asked the question to say, how would you sum up Buddhism in one phrase? And without missing a beat, he turned around and said, everything changes. The sense of change that we're all going through can be mind-boggling at times. Liz Tran wrote a book called Agility Quotient, a new kind of intelligence for a world that's constantly changing. She basically goes back and says, during the Industrial Revolution, IQ, intelligence quotient, was something that was valued. So people could read instructions, so people could do their jobs, so that they could be a productive cog within society. But then as we move from manufacturing to the service, as most of what we did, Daniel Goldman, started with EQ, emotional intelligence. And now what Liz is suggesting is that we need to think about agility quotient, making ourselves more agile to this time of change. I remember back in seminary reading Alvin Toffler's book, Future Shock, and the sense at that point of saying so much is changing at such a rapid degree that the human being, the biology of the human being, could not keep up with all of the change around us. So that people found themselves a stranger in their own land, where knowledge, where relationships, where so many things were sort of thrown up in the air, so many things were changing, that it was difficult for human beings to cope. And if anything, since artificial intelligence began, since the variety of things that have happened with the breakthroughs in medical science, with so many things happening day after day after day at such a rapid means, we're in an even faster situation for change than we were back in the days of Alvin Toffler. So how do we deal with that? And Liz basically says there's sort of 3 steps to the process. The first is avoidance. We want to step away from the change. We want to make like it isn't there. We want to do whatever, we just don't want to deal with it at all. But then the next phase, because in reality we have to deal with the change, is resistance. Thinking about pushing back, fighting the change. You see this in our politics today, of people saying, let's go back to the good old days. Let's go back to the way things were, because the way things are is too overwhelming. And then the third phase is what she calls the agility quotient, of looking at change with a sense of clarity rather than emotion, of curiosity instead of control. And she talks about 4 different types of individuals that address change in different ways. I'm not going to get into that because the sermon would last a very long time. But at the very end of that, they say every one of them depends upon an anchor. An anchor that keeps us in some ways steady, that is a point of reference. And it may be that our anchor is a person or people. It could be that it's an object. It could be that it's a routine. It could be that it's a ritual, like we are doing today. Those are the things that could potentially be anchors for us in our society as we're dealing with such great change. The Gospel of John was written at a time of great change. After the destruction of the temple, when Jews had no idea, because without the temple being there as a central point of worship, where's our identity? How do we proceed? And there was vying for power, vying for influence to see who would win out in terms of creating more community. And it was the teachers in the synagogues that ultimately won out. But in the process, if you remember from the book of Acts, Jewish Christians were originally worshiping in synagogues because that was part of their heritage. They were Jews following Jesus. But with this upheaval, they were no longer welcome in the synagogues of their day. And so the question of where would they go with this new change? What would we do moving forward? And we see in John a different description of what happened on what we call Maundy Thursday. The other Gospels have some very basic things. There's, the warning about the denial of Peter. There is the sense that I'm going to be betrayed by Jesus. But the final discourse, the farewell sermon, if you will, of Jesus, is only found in the Gospel of John. Written by a Jewish Christian to a Jewish Christian community that was in a sense of crisis, of total change. And we see Jesus in this long sermon, if you will, predicting his suffering and death. And prior to today's lesson, predicting that Peter, yes, would deny him 3 times. And then addressing the individuals about what they might do with change. And in that, he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. When we say believe in, it's a matter of trust. I can say I believe that, and that's a very intellectual kind of thing, but when I say I believe in you, you believe in me, there's a bond there, there's a trust there of what that means. And Jesus is saying, no matter what happens moving forward, there will be great change. But believe in me and believe in God. And the disciples are confused and they say, what does that mean? What about God? How do we know about God? And we see Jesus then saying, what you've experienced with me is the revelation, is the incarnation, in the experience of the love of God. And that is the anchor. That is the anchor that was given to the early Christian church. It is an anchor for us as well. As we go through all of the crises within our society, as we live with a president who comes up with something new and horrible every day of the week, it can be very easy to be overwhelmed. It can be very easy to have a difficult time dealing with the change that we have happening in our country today. And those words of Jesus are just as applicable to us as they were to the disciples. And the reason why this is so important in John's gospel is because of his audience, the people he was addressing in approximately 90, the year of the Common Era. Believe in God, trust in God, trust also in me. And he talks about going forward, I'm going to be leaving you, and there will be many rooms in my father's mansion. And there will be a room for you. Now, if we take this literally, we can say, well, I'd like a room with a view and a double bed with a hard mattress. But that's not the point. This is parable. This is parable talking. This is talking in ways where we can't grasp the mystery of God and what's going to happen at that point. because the depth of that mystery is too deep for our understanding. But we have analogies. We have ways of looking like there's going to be space for us. There's going to be relationship because you are in relationship with me. You are in relationship with God. And that makes all the difference in the world. So that when we are confronted with the many, many changes which can knock us about, that we have touchstones, we have anchors. This ritual is an anchor. This community is an anchor. We may say we're great because we're the best thing to come along since sliced bread, but it's not because of us per se, but because of the reason why we come together to point beyond to the true touchstone of Jesus, of living into Jesus' ministry, of living into Jesus' care for the poor, of living into Jesus saying, love God, love your neighbor, no exceptions, and reaching out to diverse people within the community. And so, as we face those changes, coming here, being part of ritual, being part of relationship, being part of something that points us beyond ourselves to Jesus and the Creator. For again, he said, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me.